"It doesn't make sense," said James, his forehead creased in frustration. "I know I'm doing well. I have plenty of proof. So why am I on edge? I even doubt my decisions now. I'm waking up at night, convinced someone will catch me out and that they'll fire me for being incompetent." But James wasn't incompetent. Far from it. He was the Chief Information Officer at a global online services giant, and accolades that should have made him proud. He had everything he'd ever worked for, yet all he could feel was self-doubt that clawed at him from inside. This is imposter syndrome, an apparent loss of confidence that strikes successful professionals and entrepreneurs, causing you to feel like a fraud when you're not. James knew rationally that he did a good job, but he wasn't feeling it inside. Instead, he felt isolated, stressed, and like he didn't belong. He'd only told his wife when he was first promoted, and she said, "Why don't you give it a year? It might get better once you've settled in." Now, a year later, it wasn't any better. James wouldn't sleep more than a couple of hours on the night before a big presentation, convinced he'd make some huge mistake. He also slept poorly the night after, replaying the conversations and criticizing himself. James would over-prepare for these meetings, spending far more time and energy than needed, and endlessly tweaking it to try and make it perfect. This was a typical imposter syndrome pattern for James. He'd always done it. But now, in this more senior role, the constant grind of worry and sleeplessness was exhausting, and he was heading for burnout. It was distracting, making him less focused, so he worked longer hours just to keep up. His thinking felt a bit fuzzy too, and he felt guilty, convinced he'd made a few really bad business decisions because of it. His family also paid the price on weekends, as James had trouble switching off from work. Even when they were together, he wasn't fully present with his wife and 2 young boys, and they felt it. And James was disappointed and sad that he couldn't seem to help it. With imposter syndrome, stakes are high. It impacted his work performance, career, mental and physical health, marriage, and his relationship with his sons. This was when James decided enough is enough, and he came to see me to end the nightmare of imposter syndrome. Together, James and I worked one-to-one over 12 weeks, using the structured inner success program that eliminates imposter syndrome by tackling the root cause. The first step is to calm the nervous system. Until now, the worry and stress had activated James's nervous system, which jumped into a fight or flight state. James could hear himself getting angry in meetings, and he would lash out. And later he felt embarrassed for his behavior, reinforcing his thinking that maybe he wasn't good enough and didn't belong. It felt a little out of control because it was. The activated fight state is the body's natural defense to a perceived threat. Step 1 started with James noticing every time his nervous system was triggered. We personalized ways to get it back to calm very quickly. And when James realized the problem was not him, he stopped judging himself for it, knowing that we'd deal with the reason for it, the perception of threat. After a week of this, James said, "I feel like I can breathe again." We deepened the calm by changing the environment around him. Then we dialed down James's imposter syndrome coping behaviors, including over-preparing, comparing, and perfectionism. The perfectionism showed up as not trusting his team, micromanaging, and often doing the vital work himself. Over 3 weeks, the small changes caused James to feel lighter, more positive, and more in control. He was already sleeping better and waking up energized. During an annual review, one of his team even said, "You seem much more chilled these days." James was delighted, but we hadn't finished yet. Although James was calmer in meetings, one of his peers, Andrew, always seemed to get under his skin. Knowing how to get calm again isn't enough. As James's brain was no longer on high alert, it was ready to make the biggest changes and clear the belief that drives imposter syndrome. This is the idea that everyone's worth is measured by what they do. It's called conditional worth. And here we dismantled his brain's proof that conditional worth is true. He released the emotional charge from past events that still haunted him. James said, "It's like taking off a very heavy overcoat. I can practically feel the weight being lifted from my shoulders." James realised one day that he'd stopped his angry outbursts in meetings, not because he was working hard to stay calm, but because he was no longer getting triggered, not even by Andrew. James had a difficult conversation with his boss, and these had often ended badly. In the past, James would get frustrated and angry, and his boss would withdraw, and they couldn't hear each other properly. This time, James stayed calm and present, which meant his boss remained engaged, and they reached a creative decision together. His boss even emailed him later, impressed at how authentic and productive their discussion had been. James stopped being his own worst critic and started accepting himself for his flaws as well as his successes. This deep self-acceptance was the new belief that his worth as a person is unconditional. James felt like soaring. "This is freedom," he said, because the changes felt effortless. He didn't take things personally anymore, and he could hear feedback with an easy, open mind. He no longer experienced the roller coaster of reactive emotions when things were challenging. He was amazed at his own transformation. But we still hadn't finished. Lastly, we focused on replacing mindset-type patterns such as not saying no or not asking for help. These are tricky habits to change unless you've shifted to unconditional worth. James started accepting help from his team without worrying they'd make mistakes, and his urge to micromanage just evaporated. His everyday was now great. But what about the big, high-pressure situations? In our final session, James described his week as calm and not very busy. When I asked more about his week, James revealed he'd done a high-stakes board-level presentation, a merger that was worth 25% of the company's income. James prepared well without over-preparing. He slept soundly the night before, waking refreshed and ready to go. Half an hour before the meeting, he wasn't fretting about it, as he always would have done before. But he noticed his team member was anxious about it. So James spent the time coaching her and helping her feel calm and ready too. He loved that he now had the mental space to notice her stress and to be able to mentor her. This was the kind of leader he'd always wanted to be. During the meeting, he was calm, comfortable and in flow, unflappable. When the chairman threw him a curveball, he hit it right back without missing a beat. It was actually a challenging, exciting discussion, James told me. Even at this level of high expectations and pressure, the difference in James was remarkable. Those old imposter syndrome behaviours, stresses and thinking had simply gone. It wasn't the week that was calm at all. In fact, it was a pretty intense week. It was James himself who was calm, and he'd navigated the week effortlessly. At the end of this high-pressure week, James was relaxed and ready to go home a little early and enjoy quality time with his family. But what about the future? His new belief in his unconditional worth meant that James was permanently free from imposter syndrome. He had developed deep self-acceptance, natural resilience, and effortless confidence. This would benefit him and everyone around him for the rest of his career. Results like this are typical when you eliminate the real cause of imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is not who you are. Instead, it's like an overlay that distorts how you show up in the world. When you eliminate the root cause of imposter syndrome, you uncover the real you and live from your highest values. And just like James, you'll love it.